The alien dignitaries roared with laughter as the arrogant Kobali warlord openly mocked humanity's pitiful fleet, claiming his forces would crush the primitive Earthlings in mere days. But the human admiral's next words shocked the chamber into silence. It was the year 2257, and for 2 centuries, Earth had been a peaceful member of the Galactic Federation. But that didn't stop many alien races, especially the militaristic Kobali, from viewing humans as backwards and feeble. Admiral Edward Powell, humanity's most respected naval commander, struggled to maintain his composure as he stood before the assembled alien leaders at the diplomatic summit on the Kobali homeworld. Warlord Talon, the preening avian ruler of the Kobali Dominion, had just boldly claimed that his mighty armada could easily conquer the Earth in a matter of days. Powell stepped forward, his voice booming across the auditorium. He declared that Earth was far from defenseless, and that the Kobali would deeply regret any attack on his homeworld. Talon scoffed, continuing his tirade of insults against the human race. With a grim smile, Powell revealed a shocking secret. Before joining the Federation, humanity had constructed an immensely powerful war fleet, one that had remained hidden for centuries. This ancient fleet still existed, maintained in secret by a clandestine human military order. And if the Kobali dared assault the Earth, humanity would unleash the full might of this dreaded armada. A wave of murmurs spread through the chamber. Most of the alien dignitaries dismissively rolled their eyes or chuckled, believing Powell's claims to be a laughable bluff. Surely this ancient fleet was just a myth, or had long ago rusted away. But a few of the wiser delegates, those who had learned to never underestimate humans, shifted uneasily in their seats. As the fruitless summit adjourned, Admiral Powell immediately contacted his superiors back on Earth to report on the rapidly deteriorating situation with the Kobali. In a stark underground command bunker, Earth's leaders grimly contemplated an act unprecedented in modern human history, activating the ancient fleet's mighty engines of war for the first time in centuries. Meanwhile, the warmongering warlord Talon rallied his generals and allies, arguing for a preemptive strike against Earth to neutralize the threat of the ancient fleet before it could be brought to bear against the Kobali. The stage was set for a cataclysmic confrontation that would reshape the face of the galaxy. If Powell's dire warnings were ignored and the ancient fleet failed to halt the massive invasion Armada Talon was amassing, then billions on Earth would burn under Kobali guns. The fate of humanity now rested on the skill and courage of an aging admiral, a mysterious fleet from antiquity, and the grim determination of the human race to survive at any cost. Back on Earth, Admiral Powell wasted no time. He strode into the Defense Council chambers, his face grim. "Counselors, the situation is dire. Warlord Talon is openly threatening invasion. We must take action to defend Earth." The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Some called for diplomacy, others for a preemptive strike. Powell raised his hand for silence. "I believe our best course of action is to begin reactivating key assets of the ancient fleet. It's a risk, but we may need their power to deter the Kobali." After hours of heated debate, the council reluctantly agreed. Powell immediately set out for the secret location where the mighty ships had slumbered for centuries. Deep beneath an unassuming mountain range, hidden from prying eyes, lay a marvel of engineering. Row upon row of battleships, cruisers, and dreadnoughts stretched out before Powell as he entered the cavernous hangar. At his side was Commander Nathaniel Hawkins, the stalwart guardian of this secret base. "Admiral, it's an honor," Hawkins saluted. "I never thought I'd see the day when the ancient fleet would sail again." Powell nodded solemnly. "Let's hope they're as formidable as the legends say. We're going to need every last ship to face the Kobali." They made their way to the control center, a hive of activity as technicians hurried to bring systems online that had lain dormant for generations. Powell and Hawkins began the activation protocols, watching in awe as the first ships thrummed to life. "My God, the power readings are off the charts," Hawkins breathed. "The shielding, the weaponry. It's like nothing I've ever seen." But Powell's eyes were drawn to the sleek, deadly lines of the flagship Invictus. "She's a beauty. and she'll need a captain worthy of her. He already had a name in mind, Marcus Donovan, a rising star in the fleet whose tactical brilliance was becoming legendary. If anyone could unlock the potential of these ancient vessels, it was Donovan. As the ships slowly powered up, teams of engineers swarmed over them, integrating modern technology with the ancient systems. It was a delicate balance, preserving the awesome power of the original design while updating the vessels to be effective against current threats. Unbeknownst to Powell, light years away, Talon's spies were hard at work. Whispers reached the warlord of strange activity in the Sol system, whispers that hinted the human ancient fleet may be more than myth. Talon's paranoia grew with each report. He harangued his subordinates to gather more ships, more weapons. The humans must be crushed swiftly before they could bring their full strength to bear. On Earth, Powell received the dire news. Talon's fleet was mobilizing for an all-out attack. The ancient fleet, as mighty as it was, might not be ready in time. He called an emergency council of Earth's leadership. The room was silent as he laid out the situation. "We have two options," Powell said heavily. "Reveal the ancient fleet's existence and send them to confront the Kobali head-on, or keep them hidden and pray our defenses hold against Talon's onslaught." The debate raged for hours. To unveil the fleet was to risk escalating an already volatile situation, but to hold them back could doom Earth to destruction. As the arguments flew back and forth, Powell stared out the window at the blue curve of Earth's horizon. So much rested on his shoulders. The very survival of humanity lay in the balance. Somehow, he had to find a way to keep Earth safe while preventing the galaxy from descending into total war. The ancient fleet was a double-edged sword, a deterrent of immense power, but also a spark that could ignite a conflagration consuming everything in its path. The game had begun, a shadowy dance of threat and counter-threat, as humanity and the Kobali readied themselves for the unthinkable. And Admiral Powell stood at the center, the fate of worlds resting on his next move. Admiral Powell stood on the bridge of the Invictus, watching the stars streak by as the small task force pushed towards the edge of human space. Captain Marcus Donovan stood at his side, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Sir, we're approaching the coordinates where intelligence spotted the Kobali patrol," Donovan reported. Powell nodded. "Remember, Captain, we're here to send a message, not start a war. Disable their ships, but no casualties." "Understood, Admiral." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the human ships dropped out of FTL. Almost immediately, alarms blared. "Kobali vessels detected," the sensor officer called out. 3 frigates moving to intercept." The comm officer's voice cut through the noise. "Sir, we're being hailed." A sneering Kobali face appeared on the main view screen. "Human vermin, you dare trespass in our space? Turn back now, or be destroyed." Powell stepped forward, his voice steady. "This is neutral territory, Kobali. We have every right to be here." The Kobali captain's feathers ruffled in agitation. "Enough! You will leave or we will open fire." As the transmission cut off, Powell turned to Donovan. "Show them what the Invictus can do, Captain." Donovan's fingers flew over the tactical console. "Activating primary defense grid, powering up main cannon." The Kobali ships opened fire, their energy weapons splashing harmlessly against the Invictus's shields. In response, a brilliant beam of energy lanced out from the human flagship, slicing through the lead Kobali frigate's engines with surgical precision. "Target disabled, sir," Donovan reported calmly. "Moving on to the next." In a matter of minutes, all 3 Kobali ships hung dead in space, their weapons and engines offline. Powell opened a channel to the stunned Kobali crews. "This is Admiral Powell of Earth. We could destroy you, but we choose not to. Remember that when you report back to your superiors." As the task force turned back towards Earth, Powell knew the real battle was just beginning. The news of the encounter spread like wildfire through the galactic community. Vid footage of the Invictus's awesome power played on repeat across countless worlds. In his war room on the Kobali homeworld, Warlord Talon raged at his advisors. How? How did the humans acquire such technology? One of his generals stepped forward hesitantly. My lord, perhaps we should reconsider our plans, if this is just one ship of their fleet. Talon lashed out, striking the general across the face. Coward, we will crush the humans, no matter what toys they've dug up from their past. Double our intelligence efforts. Find me a weakness in this ancient fleet. Back on Earth, Powell oversaw the integration of more ancient fleet vessels into the modern defense force. In a cavernous underground hangar, engineers swarmed over a massive dreadnought, installing updated comm systems and shield generators. Admiral, a young lieutenant approached, datapad in hand. We've received word from the Arcturian Confederation. They're offering military support against any Kobali aggression. Powell allowed himself a small smile. Earth's diplomats were making progress, leveraging the reveal of the ancient fleet to build a coalition against Kobali expansionism. But he knew it might not be enough. In his office later that night, Powell pored over intelligence reports. The Kobali were massing their forces, preparing for a massive strike. He pulled up a star chart, studying the spread of human colonies. They'll hit us everywhere at once, he muttered. Try to overwhelm us before we can bring the full ancient fleet online. Powell called up his senior staff. There was no more time for subtlety. The ancient fleet would have to be fully deployed, ready to meet the Kobali threat head-on. As he issued orders for the final preparations, Powell couldn't shake the feeling that the fate of humanity would be decided in the coming days. The pieces were set. Now, it was only a matter of time before Talon made his move. Powell stood on the bridge of the Invictus, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Captain Donovan, status report. Admiral, the strike force is in position around Proxima Centauri. We've established a defensive perimeter, and all systems are at full readiness. Powell nodded, his fists tight. Good. We can't let the Kobali gain a foothold here. The bridge fell silent as they waited. Minutes ticked by, stretching into hours. Then suddenly, multiple hyperspace signatures detected, the sensor officer called out. It's the Kobali fleet. The view screen lit up as dozens of Kobali warships tore into real space. For a moment, there was an eerie calm as the two fleets faced each other across the void. Sir, we're being hailed, the comms officer reported. Talon's face appeared on screen, his eyes widening in shock as he took in the sight of the ancient fleet arrayed against him. What trickery is this? How dare you? Powell cut the transmission. All ships, battle stations, engage the enemy. The space around Proxima Centauri erupted in chaos as energy beams and missiles crisscrossed between the opposing fleets. The ancient fleet's superior technology showed immediately, their weapons slicing through Kobali shields with ease. On the Invictus's bridge, Donovan barked orders. Concentrate fire on their lead ships, push through their center. Powell watched in awe as Donovan's tactics unfolded. The ancient fleet moved with uncanny precision, punching a hole straight through the Kobali formation. Donovan didn't hesitate. All ships, press the attack, target their flagship. Talon's voice crackled over the comms, filled with rage. You think your relics can defeat us? All ships focus fire on the human flagship. Obliterate them. The Kobali fleet unleashed a furious barrage against the Invictus, but their weapons splashed harmlessly against its shields. Sir, our shields are holding at 98%, the tactical officer reported, a note of disbelief in his voice. Donovan allowed himself a small smile. Let's show them what this ship can really do. Main cannon, fire. A lance of energy burst from the Invictus, slamming into Talon's flagship. The Kobali vessel's shields collapsed instantly, its hull buckling under the impact. Their flagship is crippled, Donovan reported. The rest of their fleet is losing cohesion. Powell nodded grimly. Push the attack. Don't let up. The battle raged for another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. Donovan's tactics, combined with the sheer power of the ancient fleet, devastated the Kobali forces. Finally, Talon's voice came over the comms once more, filled with bitter defeat. All ships, retreat. Fall back to Rally Point Omega. As the remaining Kobali ships fled into hyperspace, Powell turned to Donovan. Excellent work, Captain, but we're not done yet. Pursue and disable as many of those ships as you can. We need to press our advantage. Donovan nodded, already issuing orders to the fleet. The ancient ships surged forward, their engines flaring as they gave chase to the retreating Kobali. In the days that followed, news of the battle spread rapidly. Powell found himself inundated with reports from across the galaxy. The Kobali's aura of invincibility had been shattered. Former allies were distancing themselves, and there were even rumors of unrest on the Kobali homeworld itself. In a secure briefing room on Earth, Powell met with the planet's leaders. The Kobali threat has been blunted, but not eliminated, he said. We have an opportunity now to go on the offensive, to eliminate their ability to threaten us again. There were nods of agreement around the table. One of the civilian leaders spoke up. What do you propose, Admiral? Powell pulled up a star chart. We use the ancient fleet to systematically target their forward bases and supply lines, cut off their ability to wage war. With your approval, I'll begin drawing up plans immediately. As the meeting adjourned, Powell couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. But he knew the war was just getting started. Somewhere out there, Talon was licking his wounds, planning his next move, and Powell intended to be ready when it came. Warlord Talon paced the bridge of his flagship, his talons clicking against the metal floor. The bitter taste of defeat at Proxima Centauri burned in his throat. He stopped abruptly, turning to face his assembled officers. Enough games, Talon snarled. We strike at the heart of humanity. Prepare all ships for a full-scale assault on Earth. His subordinates exchanged uneasy glances. One dared to speak up. But sir, our losses... Talon's hand shot out, grasping the officer by the throat. I don't want excuses. I want Earth in flames. As the Kobali Armada surged towards Seoul, Admiral Powell stood in Earth's Central Command Center, studying a holographic display of the system. A young lieutenant approached, datapad in hand. Sir, we've intercepted Kobali communications. They're coming for Earth. Powell's eyes narrowed. He tapped his comm badge. Powell to Donovan. Captain, recall your strike force immediately. We need every ship we have to defend Earth. Understood, Admiral. Donovan's voice crackled over the comm. We're already en route. Over the next hours, Powell watched as the ancient fleet took up defensive positions around Earth and its colonies. A vast network of sensor buoys and interdiction fields sprang to life, creating a formidable barrier against the coming Kobali onslaught. The first wave of Kobali ships dropped out of FTL at the edge of the system. Powell's voice rang out across the fleet. All ships, battle stations, engage the enemy. Space lit up with weapons fire as the two fleets clashed. Kobali ships darted forward, probing for weaknesses in the human lines. But each time they pushed, Donovan's tactics countered them. On the bridge of the Invictus, Donovan barked orders. Gamma Squadron, close that gap. Delta, reinforce our left flank. The ancient fleet moved with uncanny precision, their advanced weapons tearing through Kobali shields. But still, Talon's forces pressed on, wave after wave, hurling themselves against the human defenses. Aboard his flagship, Talon watched the battle unfold with growing frustration. He turned to his second-in-command. Prepare a strike force, our fastest ships, loaded with our heaviest weapons. While we keep the humans occupied, they'll slip past their defenses and strike Earth directly. As the main battle raged, a small group of Kobali ships broke away, using the chaos as cover. They slipped past the human picket lines, streaking towards Earth at maximum speed. In Earth's command center, alarms blared. Sir, a sensor operator called out. Kobali ships have breached our perimeter. They're heading straight for Earth. Powell's hands clenched into fists. Scramble our reserves. We need to intercept them before... His words were cut off as the first impacts rocked the planet. The Kobali strike force had entered orbit, raining down destruction on Earth's cities and military bases. On the Invictus, Donovan watched in horror as the attacks unfolded on his tactical display. His ship was too far out to intervene in time, unless... Helm! Donovan shouted. Prepare for an in-system micro-jump. Plot a course to put us directly between those Kobali bastards and Earth. Sir, his navigation officer protested, a jump that precise, it's never been done. Then we'll be the first, Donovan cut him off. Do it, now. The Invictus vanished in a flash of light, reappearing an instant later in low Earth orbit, directly in the path of the Kobali strike force. Donovan didn't hesitate. All weapons fire at will. The Invictus unleashed its full arsenal. Beam weapons sliced through Kobali ships like paper. Missiles found their marks with unerring accuracy. In a matter of minutes, the entire Kobali strike force hung in space as little more than drifting wreckage. With Earth safe for the moment, Donovan turned his attention back to the main Kobali fleet. This is Captain Donovan to all ancient fleet vessels. Form up on the Invictus. It's time we show these Kobali what we're really capable of. The tide of battle shifted dramatically. Caught between Earth's orbital defenses and the resurgent ancient fleet, Talon's forces began to crumble. On his flagship's bridge, Talon watched in disbelief as his mighty armada was systematically torn apart. His voice shook as he gave the order he never thought he'd utter. All ships, full retreat. Get us out of here. But the humans weren't about to let them escape so easily. Powell's voice rang out across the fleet. Pursuit course! Don't let a single Kobali ship leave this system intact. The ancient fleet gave chase, their superior speed allowing them to run down the fleeing Kobali vessels with ease. One by one, Talon's ships were disabled or destroyed. Finally, only Talon's flagship remained. The Invictus bore down on it, weapons primed. Donovan opened a channel. Kobali vessel, this is Captain Donovan of the Earthship Invictus. Shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Talon's shoulders slumped in defeat as he gave the order to surrender. Moments later, Powell and Donovan stood on the bridge of the Invictus, watching as Talon was led away in restraints. It's over, Powell said quietly. We've won. As news of the victory spread, cheers erupted across Earth and its colonies. Humanity had faced its greatest threat and emerged triumphant. The ancient fleet, once dismissed as a fairy tale, now stood as the guardian of Earth and its people. In the days that followed, Powell found himself swamped with messages of congratulations and offers of alliance from across the galaxy. But his thoughts were already turning to the future. The Kobali threat might be neutralized, but there would always be new challenges on the horizon. He turned to Donovan, who stood at attention beside him. Well, Captain, it seems we have some work ahead of us. The galaxy's a big place, and I have a feeling the ancient fleet is going to be busy. Donovan nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ready when you are, Admiral. As they gazed out at the stars, both men knew that this victory was just the beginning. The ancient fleet had risen again, and with it, humanity's place in the galaxy was forever changed. Admiral Edward Powell stood at the head of the conference table, his eyes scanning the diverse array of alien delegates before him. The room buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from dozens of worlds affected by Kobali aggression waited for Powell to speak. Friends, allies, fellow survivors, Powell began, his voice steady and clear. We've all suffered at the hands of the Kobali, but today we have an opportunity to ensure that such suffering never happens again. He tapped a control, and a holographic display of the ancient fleet materialized above the table. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. With the power of the ancient fleet at our disposal, we can create a defensive alliance unlike any the galaxy has ever seen. A shield to protect us all from those who would seek to dominate through force. As Powell outlined his proposal for the Galactic Shield Pact, he could see the excitement building in the eyes of the delegates. When he finished, a Centauri representative stood up. Earth has proven itself a worthy leader in our darkest hour, the Centauri said. The Centauri Empire pledges its full support to this alliance. One by one, other representatives voiced their agreement. Within hours, the Galactic Shield Pact was born, with Earth and its ancient fleet at its core. In the weeks that followed, Powell worked tirelessly to integrate the various alien militaries into the Pact's command structure. He stood on the bridge of the Invictus, watching as Captain Donovan led a training exercise with a mixed squadron of human and alien ships. All right, Novan Squadron. Donovan's voice crackled over the comm. Let's run the Epsilon maneuver again. Remember, timing is everything. Powell watched as the ships moved in perfect synchronization, their weapons striking holographic targets with deadly precision. He nodded in approval. Meanwhile, in a specially constructed courtroom on neutral territory, Warlord Talon stood before a panel of judges from various races. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Records of atrocities, testimonies from victims, and tactical data proving his direct involvement in war crimes. As the verdict was read, Talon's face remained impassive. For crimes against sentient beings and violations of galactic law, this tribunal sentences you to life imprisonment on the penal colony of Tartarus IV. As Talon was led away in restraints, Powell received word that the situation on the Kobali homeworld was deteriorating rapidly. He immediately convened a meeting of the Shield Pact's leadership. Our intelligence indicates that a group of Talon loyalists have seized control of a hidden shipyard, Powell explained, pointing to a series of classified images. They've activated a reserve fleet of Kobali dreadnoughts. If they're not stopped, they could plunge the entire sector back into war. The room erupted in concerned chatter. Powell raised his hand for silence. I'm deploying a Shield Pact task force to the Kobali homeworld immediately. Captain Donovan will lead the operation. Hours later, the Invictus dropped out of FTL on the outskirts of the Kobali system, leading a fleet of Shield Pact vessels. The scene that greeted them was chaos, loyalist dreadnoughts exchanging fire with the ships of the new Kobali government. Donovan's voice rang out across the fleet. All ships, engage the loyalist forces. Protect the government vessels at all costs. The space around the Kobali homeworld lit up with weapons fire as the Shield Pact fleet joined the fray. The Invictus led the charge, its advanced weapons tearing through the loyalist dreadnoughts with ease. On the bridge of the Invictus, Donovan barked orders. Concentrate fire on their flagship. Cut the head off the snake. The loyalist flagship crumbled under the combined assault of the Shield Pact forces. As it exploded in a brilliant fireball, the remaining loyalist ships began to break formation, their will to fight evaporating. In the aftermath of the battle, Shield Pact peacekeepers landed on the Kobali homeworld. They moved swiftly to root out the remaining pockets of loyalist resistance, securing key infrastructure and government buildings. Powell stood in the newly secured Kobali capital, facing the leaders of the new government. The Kobali prime minister, his scales dulled with stress and fatigue, bowed his head. Admiral Powell, we owe you and the Shield Pact a debt we can never repay, the prime minister said. We humbly request to join your alliance. The Kobali people have seen the error of our ways, and we wish to stand with you in defense of peace. Powell extended his hand, and the prime minister grasped it firmly. Welcome to the Galactic Shield Pact, Powell said. Together, we'll ensure a safer galaxy for all. As Powell looked out over the Kobali capital, he knew that challenges still lay ahead. But with the ancient fleet and the united strength of the Shield Pact, he felt confident that they could face whatever the universe might throw at them. Admiral Edward Powell stood at the viewport of the Shield Pact headquarters, his gaze fixed on the stars. The victory over the Kobali was still fresh, but new threats loomed. Sir, we've got reports from our deep space probes, his aide said, handing him a datapad. Powell's eyes narrowed as he read, Loyalist activity in the outer colonies. Damn. He strode to the command center, where a holographic map of Kobali space flickered to life. Red dots marked suspected Loyalist strongholds. Get me Captain Donovan, Powell ordered. Moments later, Donovan's face appeared on the main screen. Admiral? Marcus, I'm dispatching you and the Invictus to deal with these Loyalist remnants. We can't let them gain a foothold. Donovan nodded. Understood, sir. We'll root them out. As the Invictus and its support fleet prepared for departure, Powell turned his attention to the Kobali homeworld. Prime Minister Jevra's face filled the screen, his scales a muted gray. Admiral, the reforms are challenging, Jevra said, his voice strained. Many see our new path as weakness. Stay the course, Prime Minister, Powell urged. We'll support you however we can. The conversation was cut short as alarms blared. Sir, a technician called out, we're detecting multiple attacks on Shield Pact outposts. Powell watched in dismay as reports flooded in. Loyalist strike teams hit with surgical precision, targeting key facilities and sowing chaos. On the Kobali homeworld, Prime Minister Jevra hurried through the corridors of the government complex, flanked by security. Suddenly, explosions rocked the building. "Get down!" a shield-packed guard shouted, tackling Jevra as plasma bolts sizzled overhead. Loyalist commandos poured into the hall, their weapons blazing. The shield-packed detail returned fire, the air filling with acrid smoke and the screams of the wounded. Jevra cowered behind a fallen column as the battle raged. A Loyalist fighter vaulted over their cover, vibro blade raised high. The Prime Minister closed his eyes, bracing for the end. A single shot rang out. The Loyalist crumpled to the floor. Jevra looked up to see a shield-packed sniper nodding grimly from a nearby balcony. In deep space, the Invictus dropped out of FTL, leading a formidable battle group. Captain Donovan's voice rang out across the fleet. "All ships, battle stations. We've tracked the Loyalist leadership to this system. Let's end this." The fleet surged forward, weapons charged. As they neared the third planet, a massive structure shimmered into view. A Loyalist shipyard. "Sir," Donovan's tactical officer called out, "we're detecting multiple ship launches from the facility." Donovan's eyes narrowed. "So they want to fight. Let's oblige them. All ships, engage." Space lit up with weapons fire as the two fleets clashed. The Loyalist ships fought with desperate ferocity, but they were no match for the power of the ancient fleet. On the bridge of the Invictus, Donovan barked orders. "Concentrate fire on their command ship. We take out their leadership. This ends today." The Invictus's main gun spoke, lancing out with devastating precision. The Loyalist flagship's shields buckled, then failed. "Sir," the comms officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the enemy vessel, audio only." A gravelly voice filled the bridge. "This is Warlord Valak. You've won nothing today, humans. The spirit of the true Kobali will never die." Donovan's voice was cold. "It's over, Valak. Surrender now or be destroyed." There was a long pause before Valak's reply came. "Very well. We surrender." As shield-packed Marines boarded the Loyalist vessels, Donovan allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The last remnants of Talon's regime were finally defeated. Back on the Kobali homeworld, Prime Minister Jevra stood before a crowd of his people. His voice rang out, steady and clear. "Today marks a new beginning for the Kobali people. We have seen the cost of aggression and now choose a different path. To those who fought against us, I offer amnesty. Lay down your arms and help us build a better future." As Jevra's words echoed across the planet, thousands of Loyalists emerged from hiding, surrendering their weapons to shield-packed peacekeepers. Admiral Powell watched the scenes unfold from his command center, a sense of cautious optimism filling him. The Kobali threat was neutralized, and a new era of peace seemed within reach. But even as he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, a junior officer approached with a worried expression. "Sir," the young man said, handing over a datapad, "long-range sensors have detected something unusual. You need to see this." Powell's brow furrowed as he read the report. A chill ran down his spine as he realized the Kobali conflict may have been just the beginning. Admiral Powell leaned over the holographic display, his weathered face illuminated by the ghostly blue light. The room hummed with tension as he studied the intelligence reports streaming in from deep space probes. "Sir," a young analyst spoke up, her voice tight, "we've detected unusual activity in Sector 7 Alpha. It's not Kobali." Powell's eyes narrowed. He tapped a series of commands, bringing up a detailed scan of the sector. Strange energy signatures pulsed across the display, unlike anything he'd seen before. "What in God's name?" he muttered. Hours later, Powell stood before the shield-packed council, his uniform crisp despite the lack of sleep. Representatives from a dozen species watched him intently as he cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we face a new threat. An advanced civilization known as the Xylarians has been monitoring our activities. They view our alliance as a potential danger to their territory." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. A Centauri delegate raised a hand. "How do you know this, Admiral?" "Because they told us themselves," Powell replied grimly. He recounted the tense meeting with the Xylarian envoy, the aliens' cold eyes and veiled threats still fresh in his mind. They demanded we withdraw from systems bordering their space, Powell continued. I made it clear that the Shield Pact exists solely to defend its members, not to conquer. The envoy didn't take it well. The council erupted in worried chatter. Powell raised his hands for silence. We need more information. That's why I've dispatched Captain Donovan and the Invictus on a covert reconnaissance mission. Across the galaxy, the Invictus slipped through the inky void, its stealth systems engaged. On the bridge, Captain Donovan peered at the sensor readouts, sweat beading on his forehead despite the ship's cool air. Status report, he barked. His XO looked up from her console. We've penetrated Xylarian space, sir. No sign of detection yet. Donovan nodded. Maintain course. Let's see what we're up against. For days, the Invictus prowled through enemy territory, its powerful sensors drinking in data. They cataloged Xylarian outposts, mapped patrol routes, and analyzed communication patterns. Then they found the shipyards. Donovan's blood ran cold as the sensor data poured in. Massive vessels unlike anything he'd ever seen filled his view screen. Weapons emplacements bristled along their hulls, crackling with barely contained energy. My God, Donovan whispered. There must be thousands of them. His tactical officer's voice shook. Sir, their tech, it's beyond anything we have. Even the ancient fleet couldn't... Abort mission, Donovan snapped. Get us out of here, now. The Invictus turned tail, racing back to friendly space. Donovan's mind raced as he prepared his report. The Shield Pact was in for one hell of a wake-up call. Back on Earth, Powell convened an emergency summit. Leaders from across the Alliance gathered, their faces grim as Donovan's findings were laid bare. The Xylarians outmatch us in every category, Powell said, his voice heavy. Their fleet dwarfs our own. Their weapons, he shook his head. We're outgunned, plain and simple. A Thalesian admiral slammed his tentacle on the table. So what do we do? Roll over and let them bully us? Powell's eyes hardened. No, we prepare. We innovate. And we pray to whatever gods might be listening that diplomacy prevails. Because if it comes to war... He left the thought unfinished. The room fell silent as the gravity of their situation sank in. The Shield Pact faced its greatest challenge yet, and the destiny of the universe hung in the balance. Admiral Powell paced the dimly lit war room, his boots echoing on the metal floor. Holographic displays flickered around him, each one detailing the overwhelming might of the Xylarian forces. He turned to face the grim-faced leaders of the Shield Pact. Gentlemen, we're outgunned and outmatched. A direct confrontation with the Xylarians would be suicide. The Centauri ambassador leaned forward, his luminous eyes narrowed. What do you propose, Admiral? Powell's heart made. We need an edge. Captain Donovan. Donovan snapped to attention. Sir? Assemble a task force. I want our best minds, scientists, engineers, tacticians. Your mission is to find a way to level the playing field against the Xylarians. Use whatever resources you need. Donovan nodded sharply. Understood, Admiral. I'll begin immediately. Weeks later, the Invictus cut through the void of deep space, its hull jam packed with sensor arrays. On the bridge, Donovan hunched over a console, studying readouts as his hand-picked team worked feverishly around him. Dr. Alara Tassoni, a brilliant Asari physicist, called out, Captain, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures in Sector 47 Beta. It doesn't match any known patterns. Donovan straightened. Take us in, helm, nice and easy. The Invictus glided into a debris field, fragments of ancient technology tumbling past its viewports. A massive structure loomed ahead, its surface pitted and scarred by millennia of cosmic radiation. By the gods, Alara breathed. It's a precursor outpost. Donovan's eyes widened. Prep a boarding team, full containment protocols. Hours later, Donovan stood in a cavernous chamber deep within the derelict station. Dust swirled around his feet as he approached a towering monolith covered in alien script. Chief Engineer Raxus, a grizzled Turian veteran, ran his Omni tool over its surface. Captain, this is it. A data repository. The amount of information here, it's staggering. Donovan tapped his comm. Invictus, prep for data transfer, and get me a secure line to Admiral Powell. Months blurred into a year as the brightest minds of the Shield Pact worked tirelessly to unlock the secrets of the precursor technology. In a hardened bunker deep beneath the surface of Mars, Dr. Ilara Tassoni stared at a holographic representation of a massive energy weapon. "We've done it," she said, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "The directed energy cannon is ready for prototype testing." Across the room, Raxus looked up from a swirling diagram of exotic particles. "And the power amplification system is online. We're ready to integrate it with the ship's reactors." Donovan nodded, his face etched with exhaustion and hope. "Excellent work, both of you. Let's get this tech to the Invictus and see what she can do." The Invictus emerged from the Mars shipyards, its hull gleaming with new armor plating. A massive barrel protruded from its prow, the experimental directed energy cannon. Donovan stood on the bridge, his hand hovering over the weapons console. "All systems green, Captain," his tactical officer reported. "Test target is in range." Donovan took a deep breath. Fire. A blinding lance of energy erupted from the Invictus, slamming into a derelict battlecruiser floating in space. The target's shields flared brilliantly for a split second before collapsing. The hull crumpled and disintegrated under the onslaught. Silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the soft beeping of consoles. Then a cheer erupted from the crew. Donovan allowed himself a small smile. "Get me Admiral Powell. He needs to see this." In his office on Earth, Powell reviewed the test footage, his face grim but determined. He turned to his aide. "Begin full-scale production. I want every ship in the ancient fleet retrofitted with this technology as soon as possible." Weeks later, Powell stood before a massive holographic display of shield-packed space. Red icons representing Xylarian fleet movements blinked ominously at the borders. A junior officer approached, his face pale. "Sir, we've intercepted Xylarian communications. They're mobilizing for a preemptive strike." Powell's eyes hardened. He keyed his comm. "This is Admiral Powell to all Shield Pack forces. Assume defensive positions. This is not a drill. The future of our alliance hangs in the balance. May God be with us all." The Invictus hung in space, its hull scarred but intact. On the bridge, Captain Donovan stood rigid, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. A sea of red icons swarmed towards their position. "Xylarian fleet emerging from hyperspace, sir," his tactical officer reported. "Numbers are astronomical." Donovan's expression resolute. He keyed the ship-wide comm. "All hands, battle stations. This is not a drill." The ship thrummed as energy surged through its systems. Donovan felt the familiar weight of command settle on his shoulders. Admiral Powell's face appeared on the main view screen. "Captain, I need you to lead the vanguard. We'll hold the line here." Donovan nodded sharply. "Understood, sir. We won't let you down." The Invictus surged forward, leading a wedge formation of ancient fleet ships. As they approached the edge of the contested border, the void ahead lit up with the telltale flashes of ships dropping out of hyperspace. Donovan's breath caught in his throat. The Xylarian armada stretched as far as the eye could see, a vast ocean of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields. "My God," someone whispered. Donovan's voice cut through the stunned silence. "Raise shields. Charge the directed energy cannon." The ship's computer chimed, signaling the weapon's readiness. Donovan allowed himself a grim smile. The Xylarians had no idea what was coming. The enemy fleet wasted no time. A wave of searing plasma and crackling ion beams lanced out, battering against the ancient fleet's shields. Donovan braced himself, expecting alarms to blare and systems to fail. Instead, the Invictus shrugged off the assault like rain on a roof. "Shields holding at 92%, sir," his engineer reported, surprise evident in her voice. Donovan didn't hesitate. "Target their flagship, fire!" A beam of concentrated energy, bright as a newborn star, erupted from the Invictus's prow. It sliced through the void, punching through the Xylarian dreadnought's shields as if they weren't there. The massive ship's forward section simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant. For a heartbeat, the battlefield fell silent. Then Powell's voice crackled over the comm. "All ships, open fire!" The ancient fleet struck as one, their new weapons carving through the Xylarian armada. Ships that would have shrugged off their heaviest ordnance mere weeks ago now crumpled under the onslaught. But the Xylarians weren't beaten yet. Donovan watched in horror as damaged enemy vessels deliberately veered towards his fleet, intent on taking shield-packed ships with them. "Evasive maneuvers!" he barked. The Invictus rolled and dove, narrowly avoiding a collision with a burning Xylarian cruiser. The battle raged on, a frantic dance of destruction. Donovan's hands flew over his console, coordinating attacks and defensive formations. The Invictus shuddered as glancing blows slipped past their defenses. Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. "Captain!" his science officer shouted. "I'm detecting massive power spikes from the remaining Xylarian dreadnoughts. They're overloading their reactors." Donovan's blood ran cold. "Emergency warp, now!" The Invictus leapt into faster-than-light travel mere seconds before a blinding flash consumed the battlefield. When they dropped back into normal space, Donovan's heart sank. Where a proud fleet had stood, now only debris and expanding clouds of radiation remained. "Status report," he demanded, his voice hoarse. His XO's face was grim. "We lost over a third of the fleet, sir, but the Xylarians, they're gone." As Donovan processed the Pyrrhic victory, a new alert chimed. His blood froze as he read the incoming data. "Admiral," he called, opening a channel to Powell. "We've detected a Xylarian drone convoy. They're carrying antimatter warheads, headed for the Arcturus colony." Powell's response was immediate. "Pursue and destroy, Captain, at all costs." The Invictus leapt into action once more, pushing its engines to the limit. Donovan's crew worked feverishly, plotting intercept courses and readying weapons. Time seemed to stretch as they raced against the clock. Finally, the drone convoy appeared on their sensors, mere minutes from their target. "Fire everything we've got," Donovan ordered. The Invictus unleashed its full arsenal. Beams of concentrated energy lashed out, joined by a barrage of missiles and railgun fire. The drones exploded in silent balls of fire, their deadly payload neutralized just short of the helpless colony. Donovan slumped in his chair, exhaustion finally catching up to him. They'd won, but at a terrible cost. As reports of casualties and damage flooded in, he knew the real work was just beginning. The ancient fleet limped home, battered but unbroken. On 1,000 worlds, news of their victory spread. Memorials rose to honor the fallen, even as shipyards worked overtime to rebuild their losses. On the Invictus's observation deck, Donovan stood beside Admiral Powell, gazing out at the stars. "It's not over," Powell said quietly. Donovan nodded. "No, sir, but we'll be ready for whatever comes next."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.